Welcome back, everybody, to the Breakthrough Moment podcast, where we interview successful entrepreneurs and investors and ask them what is their biggest breakthrough moment in their career, the moment that changed it all and took them into another level of success or impact or insight. And as they share that moment with us at home have breakthroughs as well. My name is Deane with special guest Rik Schnabel. How are you doing today? Welcome.
I'm doing really, really well, Zach. How are you?
Very well. I'm excited for this. The more I get to learn about you and your background, the more I have so many fascinating questions. Where are you in the world today?
I am on the Sapphire Coast of New South Wales, which is also Merimbula area, and just right outside there is a beautiful ocean,
Oh,
and we're seeing lots of pods of dolphins at the moment. And we had a big, enormous group of seals. I don't know what you call a group of seals. I'll just call them a group of seals. But it's
flock of
fantastic.
seagulls. Yeah, beautiful. Australia's beautiful. I miss many things about it, including the wildlife and everything like that. But well, let's
Yeah.
change some lives. Hey, let me do a quick, awesome intro for you and dive into your breakthrough moment. I'm super curious. So, everybody at home, today is about helping you have a breakthrough. You guys are in for a treat. Grab your pen and paper, take some notes. What is the biggest thing holding you back? Is it your circumstances or is it the way you think and how your brain thinks? Today, we're going to talk about how our brain is conditioned and how to have a breakthrough. So, today's guest, Rik, went from having just $27 to his name, facing homelessness, to then building a multi-million dollar business and becoming one of the world's leading transformational coaches. Get this, with over 39,000 hours helping people break through, very relevant to their break through their limitations. Rik has spent a decade uncovering how our minds create success, struggle, and everything in between. So, this episode, we're going to be diving deep into the beliefs, the patterns, the mental shortcuts that keep people stuck and how to finally break free from them. It's definitely on point here. And if you guys stick around to the end, Rik's going to reveal these two questions that are going to allow you to redefine your life and the value of your life forever. So stick around to the end. Rik, welcome to the Breakthrough Moment podcast. What has been your biggest breakthrough moment? Let's start there.
Okay. I think my biggest breakthrough moment was the moment that you described. And I've had two of those in my life. I was starting an advertising agency. I spent most of my years in advertising agencies and, working with major brands, helping them make multi millions of dollars. And I was starting the agency at the point when Paul Keating, the Prime Minister in Australia, declared the recession that you had to have. And so we had a major recession, and I was I don't know how I was surviving financially, but I was surviving off about $50 a week and with a mortgage and a whole bunch of other things. And I don't know how I did it to this day, but I did somehow. But I had another experience like that much further into my life. We got through it, of course. I sold half of the agency and cleared all our debt. And we grew, how much did we grow? 3,000% that year. And it was fantastic. We went from number 354 in the agency stakes to number 12. And then I sold that business. And then I was at a point in life where I knew there was another step for me. And I didn't quite know what that was. I went to a sojourn to Sedona in the US and met with a lot of really interesting people. And one particular lady said that I was going to write a book that was going to change the way the world thought. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. And then I started some work. I decided to sell my business and take some time off and work for News Limited, of all companies. And so I worked for News Limited for a little time, and I was working on a project where we took about 45 people over to Hawaii for an incentive that I designed. And as we were over there, we're going through the markets, and there's this little tap on the shoulder. And I turn around, there's this little Asian lady, and she said, "There are two things that you need to know." And I went, excuse me? She said, there's two things you need to know. And I said, look, I'm working right now, which I was with a cameraman at the time, and we were looking for some locations. And so she ran into the crowd, and then she came back and put a business card in my pocket. And so I spent another week in Hawaii after I said goodbye to the film crew and everyone. And first place I went to was this little bure. And she said to me, she said, I'm glad you came. These two things that you need to know. She said, the first is that you're going to write a book that's going to change the way the world thinks. And I went, oh my God. And I said, I've heard that before. And she said, but there's one other thing that's going to hinder your book. And I said, what's that? And you know how sometimes we put on a mask and we put on armor and we don't want to reveal ourselves? This comment almost brought me to tears. She said, you think you're stupid. And because you think you're stupid, you're going to make this book so verbose and so complex in its languaging that most average people will not even understand what you're saying in this book. And this book needs a breakthrough, so people need to understand it in order for them to break through. And so I thought, this is really strange. This is really, really weird. But something happened about 8 years after this. I was working in a company that had recruited me from News Limited, but they weren't really after my marketing expertise nor my advertising. They were after my sales expertise, which I was really curious about because I thought, I haven't really spent a long time in sales at all, other than in my own businesses, selling proposals and ideas. And I had this belief system that I really thought I was bad at sales. And this was the beginning of an epiphany for me, because your beliefs become what those beliefs actually hold. Like you're always projecting your future. I didn't know that at the time. And so I was looking at losing my job. I just had got married. We just had our first child, a new mortgage, which didn't have enough equity in it even to sell it and cover my costs. And my wife reported one day that we were down to $27 in our bank account. And I just fell in a heap. Emotionally, I fell in a heap. Psychologically, I fell in a heap. I could not see a way forward. I was going to lose my job. I wasn't earning the income. I wasn't bringing in the sales. But a good thing that happened to me around that same time was I was working with a crazy American who was telling me that everything that you hold in here and in this brain and in this brain is going to determine what happens in your future. And he sounded pretty nutso, I've got to say. But I was also learning psychology and neuro-linguistic programming and a whole bunch of other things. And I really started to see a lot of cross-pollination going on. And I began to realize that I was predicting my future. I was creating exactly the financial position that I was in. And so what I did is I had to do something, other than jump from the Rialto building where I worked. I had to do something. And I remember one particular morning, I walked to my office and I stopped. And I thought, I am not walking into that office as the loser that I have been. I'm going to walk into that office as a different person. I mean, why not? It can't get any worse than what it was. And so what I did is I started to really go back through my training and thinking about what some of these people were telling me I need to do. And so what I did is I just stopped, I paused. I knew that my emotional state was projecting my future. And my emotional state was fear, anger, sadness, frustration, and a whole bunch of other things. And I went, right, I'm going to pretend I'm an actor right now, and I'm going to walk into a role, and I'm going to be Gordon Gekko, and I'm going to walk into that office, and I'm going to make things happen. So that's what I did. I prepared myself. I got myself into the state. I started telling myself affirmations. You're a debt-free millionaire. You're a debt-free millionaire. You're a debt-free millionaire. And I walked into the office and I really felt it. And I thought, I sat at my desk firstly and I thought to myself, if I was a debt-free millionaire, every single problem that I have right now actually would disappear. All my sadness about how much money I don't have and all the debts that I have and all of those sorts of ridiculous things all would disappear. And I thought, that's it. That's the only thing I have to master in this life. I really have to master this money game. And so I walked up to the window, and the Rialto is floor to ceiling glass, and just got up against the glass. And I thought, who is the value? Who is the value in this body? What can I give to people? And I thought, I have learned so much about mindset, but I haven't applied any of it to myself. What if I completely did that? And then what if I had an incredible breakthrough? And I expected that money was going to come. Because the truth is, we don't get what we want. We sometimes get what we need, but we always get what we expect. So I decided to expect a different outcome. And the most fascinating thing happened. My phone rang, and my phone never used to ring. It just never used to ring. It was either the sales director, and he'd rarely call me. So it rang, and I picked it up. And in that phone call, I took down the order, and I was receiving an order from a client. And I took down the order, and I looked at the amount, and I thought, my commission on that order alone is half a year's income. And I thought, that's half a year's income in one phone call, just like that. Like, I had this belief system that you had to work hard, you had to work long, you had to put in the effort, all of that. And here is this moment that's completely defying everything I believed prior to this moment. So I thought about this and I thought, this is friggin' exciting, but I thought, could I do it again? So I got out of my office, did the same thing, came into the office, got up against the glass, thought, what is the value in this man that can really help others? What is the value? Forget about what other people have said in your past. Forget about the judgments, the criticisms. Forget about all the conditioning, all the nonsense, the rubbish that you've allowed to believe. My phone rang again. And in this next phone call, I made almost the same amount. There was only $1,000 difference in my commission. And then I thought, whoa, I have now earned a whole year's income in 2 phone calls, one after the other. And then I sat back. I was really excited, but there was also another part of me that was a little bit scared, I think, because I thought to myself, can I replicate this? Or is this just chance? Like, was this just incredible chance? And I thought, but the interesting thing is the first amount and the second amount was so similar that I thought to myself, what if I completely take the ceiling off this? What if I really let amazing things happen? And so I went through the whole routine again, but this time I felt tension. And I thought, oh, that's different. I'm now feeling tension. And I wasn't feeling tension before. I was feeling excited, a little bit like a child before Christmas, that level of excitement. That's what I was feeling. I was feeling that sort of level of excitement. And my phone rang again. And the third phone call, the third amount, equaled the first and the second phone call. So I made another whole year's salary in another phone call. So all of a sudden, now I have 2 years' income and all of this time. I fulfilled my contract. I could go home for 2 years if I wanted to, based on my contract. But I went, this is amazing. This is incredible. So I just kept working and I just kept working. There were some fundamental principles too that I began to apply. Many of the things I learned with neuro-linguistic programming, skills to connect to people, skills to listen. And there was a concept that I learned, which is essentially what you need to understand. It's not what you're saying. It's not what you're thinking. It's who you're being that determines who you're becoming. So what I began to do was I really began to think about that question. What is the value in this man that can give value to other people? And I immediately went to a friend of mine who was a sales director for News Limited. And I said to him, I've got this crazy idea that I really want to share with you. It's something I was taught, it's something I applied, and it changed my financial life. It has now turned what used to be my annual income, I'm now earning that in a month. So not always, like in some months I'm earning 50 grand, some months I'm earning 60, some months I'm earning my previous salary. And so I start sharing it with him. And I start sharing that, look, what you've got to do is you've got to understand that you're projecting your future out into your future. Your future hasn't happened yet, but how you're feeling in the now, and that's all you have to focus on, just the now. Just be that person that you want to be in the future, be that now. And don't wait until that person arrives. Don't wait until the money arrives. Don't wait until all of these things have to happen, because that creates sequential logic. And sequential logic doesn't exist in this space because everything is happening in the now. And so I started teaching him this, and I taught his salespeople what they need to do before they go out into a meeting. Like I've developed this ritual where I would go out to sell, and I would make sure I was at least 15, 20 minutes early, sit in my car and just sit there and project the ideas of what's going to happen in that meeting. And I remember one particular client was Noodlebox, and I sat down and I thought about what was going to happen. I never even seen the guys before, so I never even knew what they looked like. I just had to pretend. But the weirdest thing happened. I went into that meeting, and many of the things that I had projected in my mind in the car before the meeting started actually happening. They started saying things that I'd said in my head, and we really hit it off beautifully. They gave me this incredible amount of business. And it was those moments, many of those moments, that all of a sudden changed things. And then all of a sudden, I caught up with my friend, the sales director at News, and he said, this stuff that you're sharing with me? And I said, yeah. And he said, it's working. It's working. We are starting to hit whole new levels that we've never achieved before in our sales. And he said, tell me more, tell me more. Let's start documenting this, as to how you do this. And then all of a sudden he stopped and he went, you know what? He said, this is the book that you were told you were going to write, but you haven't written it yet. He said, focus on that book. And I can remember I was at a point that I totally got excited about it. I started writing this book. And a friend of mine who used to be in publishing, we were having a dinner one Sunday together, she and her husband. And she said, Rik, I was telling her all about this and about the fact that I was going to publish this book. And she said, Rik, you're a good friend and I don't want to see you hurt. But Rik, I've been in the publishing industry. There are millions of manuscripts that go in the bin every day. How do you think your book is going to be out there? Published, even a bestseller. How's it going to be out there? And I said, well, you don't know the content of my book yet. And I said, I'll tell you what's going to happen. I'm going to have 2 publishing companies that are going to want to publish my book. And I'm not going to send loads and loads of manuscripts all over the world. I am actually going to hand my manuscript to those publishers, and they're going to read it, and they're both going to want to do it. But what actually happened was I met with Sandy Grant from Hardy Grant, and I met with a guy called Peter Phillips from Pan Macmillan, and both of them wanted to publish my book. And to cut a long story short, we ended up going with another publisher, but it became a bestseller and completely changed my world. And ever since, that's what I've been doing, teaching people how to really grow themselves, grow their visions, and not get in their own way. So that was my breakthrough moment.
Well said. What a fascinating story. It's such a great story. That's one of the best breakthrough moment stories I think we've ever had. So thank you for revealing it
Oh,
like that.
thank you.
And I have so many questions. My first question is around helping other people who are going through maybe other people out there have $27 in their account. They're thinking about potentially jumping off the building. They're like, oh my God, my whole life is literally crumbling. What advice do you have for them? Real quick, before we continue, a brief message from today's sponsor. If you're an entrepreneur wanting to grow your personal brand, authority, and business through podcasting, then check out findapodcast.io. As you know, the biggest entrepreneurs in the world, they book these massive podcast tours before a big product launch or an event or book, because podcasts build trust faster than anything else online today. So it's findapodcast.io. It helps you connect with a specific podcast in your niche. It writes the pitch, it follows up in this easy CRM. It truly does save time. So you just show up, do the podcast, and your business grows. If you're curious to learn more, book in a demo at findapodcast.io. Now, let's get back to the episode.
The first thing that I would say to them is step out of logic, because we live, humanity lives on logic. It's everywhere. It's the science, it's fact, it's fact checkers, it's people who think sequentially that if I do this, then therefore that must happen. But the problem is there's so much conditioning. We have been conditioned ever since we were born. And many of our conditioning, if we think about it, is very control based. Our parents wanted to control us, not because they're bad people. It's just that that's how they were taught. Control, limit, restrict. Then we go into school, same deal. Control, limit, restrict. And then we go into the workforce and it's usually the same thing. Control, limit, constrict. And so before we know it, just a little bit like the elephant and the chain, that eventually the chain is changed to the rope, we believe we're shackled, held back. And the truth is we're not. But what I would say to anyone who's going through a tough time right now is step out of logic. That's the first piece. Step out of logic. The world doesn't work as you think it does. You've been told it works a particular way, and so you believe that it works a particular way. Like you think about, you go get a job. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to work your bollocks off to try to get acknowledged and hope that you're going to rise up through the ranks. And yes, there are so many books that tell you that's how it works, but that's not the truth. That's not how it works. There's a political system at play. There's a boys' club, a women's club. In a lot of cases, in fact, the world in some way is stacked against you until you step out of the logic. It's a little bit like some people play the game very differently to others, and they tend to stand out, and like you look at Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, even the way he dressed, it wasn't exactly the way that people of success dressed. He was just the black t-shirt and blue jeans guy. Even when he got up on stage, he broke a lot of rules. And he, in a sense, stepped out of logic. And the thing that you've got to be able to do is step out of that logic, but also understand that you've got to step out of your emotions too, because your emotions are the sum total of everything you're thinking, everything you were, everything that everyone told you you were. Your feelings are the sum total of all of those things.
I remember when I used to work at trade shows and expos around Australia, doing like the Royal Easter Show and the Ekka and, all the different, and then the home shows and the
Yeah.
vegan shows. And I used to work on commission only. And I was selling a massage cushion that was the best massage. It was such a good product. It would like massage the whole body. But it was commission based and it was a team. And I remember sometimes I'd get to 12 o'clock, hadn't sold anything. And the team's like, come on, Zach, what's going on? So I'd go to lunch and I'd sit there and I had just studied NLP at the time.
Yeah.
I was studying like Richard Bandler, John Grinder, and Tony Robbins and some other cool people. And I was like, they all talk about visualization. And so I'd visualize what you were saying before is people sitting down, going through, absolutely loving the product experience, and then just being like, yeah, I want one, paying, and then, being happy customers. And I'd walk back after lunch, going to the trade show, and I just sell like 10 of these machines, make hundreds, close to $1,000 in a day. And I was like, yes. But I think that was such a fun time, and such a great, I guess, exercise to go back to. But what is it about the visualization process that works? Like, is
Okay.
it shifting our energy? Is it shifting, if we're looking at metaphysics or spirituality, what exactly is that mechanism that actually brings those results? From your
Yeah.
understanding, you worked with 39,000 people or hours. What's been the distinction?
The thing that typically happens is to really understand what your brain actually is. Your brain is a receiver and it's a projector. So your past is what it's received, your future is what it projects. But typically, what most people do is they project the past into the future, therefore making it a continuum. A breakthrough, if you think about what a breakthrough really is, a breakthrough is when the picture that you now see is very different to what you've seen in the future. It's a completely different picture. And you might even be a different person in that particular picture. So visualization is really, really important only when it becomes conscious. Because most people are creating pictures in their minds and it's happening at nanoseconds. It's happening really, really fast. As we speak, we see pictures in our brain and we're firing off different neurons in our brain as well. And then what's happening is those mechanisms that are firing off are creating a picture. Now, typically that picture is going to be a little bit like the picture that you had in the past with a slight variation. So the importance of creating a visualization is firstly, we need to be conscious. We need to ask ourselves, okay, so this has been my life thus far. Am I happy with it? Am I pleased? Does it bring me joy? That's about getting your vibration up. But if you think about your past and your energy goes down, you're actually bringing your vibration down just by reflecting on the past. So the most important thing that you've got to do is you've got to consciously create. You've got to say, okay, my past, like my past was not great. I was raised by very poor parents who went through a depression, went through a war, and basically, like when my mum and dad passed away, I mean, they had collected so many things through their recessionary thinking. Like butter containers, plastic butter containers all stacked up in a shed somewhere, jars all stacked up somewhere, and that's a scarcity mentality. That's kind of like, we better keep everything because we'll never be able to get it again or never be able to create it again. So much of all my past pictures were very much those pictures. So of course I was going to struggle. Of course I was going to be cheated. Of course I was going to not do well. So I had to go through and create new pictures. So that's the importance of visualization. It's kind of sitting down. I think if anyone right now who's watching or listening to this is struggling and things are not going so well, the best thing you could do is stop. But your brain won't tell you that. Your brain will say, no, but I got to work harder, or I got to show up. I got to keep trying, keep doing. Well, it's the doing with repetition that's got them in the very environment that they're in right now. It's all that doing. So they're going to stop doing and they've got to really sit back and go, I don't want this. I want something different. So the best thing they could do is just stop and go, what do I want instead? What do I really want instead? And don't make it grandiose. Don't make it the Learjets, the helicopters, the mansion on the hill. Don't do that, because you're only going to do yourself harm by dreaming that big with a history that is so small. Start dreaming in little bits, just the little bits, the little things that work. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I had this idea to create a children's book. And so I created these, this character and these children books, and it was a character called Bing, which was a triangle that used to, and the theme of the story was Bing believed he could be anything. But the actual manifestation duration was very short. So he had to be very careful what he thought about, because he would go bing and turn into something, and he wouldn't think of the consequences of that something. Now, I just thought small, there's got to be a publisher that really wants this. And so, I just projected out there, there's a publisher that really wants this character, really wants this series. It would have essentially been like Bluey, today. But the thing was that I put that projection out there. I just anticipated. I felt excited, like it was going to happen. I didn't know how, but it was going to happen. And then soon after, I got a call to go to America to meet with the creators of Sesame Street. because they had seen this character through a literary agent and went, oh my God, this is perfect. But sadly, it went in a lawyer's building in the Twin Towers and the whole thing fell apart. So the thing is, I knew I was good at manifesting, but sometimes in my early part of my life, it was really my beliefs and my values and all my predictions of the future that really stepped against me. And I had another one of these moments when I got this idea. This is during the dot-com boom, of creating an online university. And I thought, yeah, why not? Online university, the biggest cost in university is the real estate and the people. What if we use the people once for their content and then we don't even have to get the buildings? What if we could deliver education online? And as a result of that, I started to do a spreadsheet on what this could look like. And I just happened to be meeting with a guy who owned a college the following day. And this guy said to me, he said, this is incredible. I showed him the idea. He said, this is incredible. He said, what are you doing on Friday? And I said, why? He said, come to Indonesia. I want you to meet with some business people and see this idea. And to cut a long story short, the idea had a projected EBIT of about $52 million in its first year. And I said to my business partner, I think this is conservative. I think it's going to be bigger than this. And so we met with a guy at a university, Tarbuka in Indonesia, and we sat down with him and he said, I want half. And I said, what are you bringing to the table? He said, well, let's run your abacus across this. He said, you're basing your projections on 7,500 students, of an EBIT of about 52 mil. He said, what happens if that number is not 7,250 students? What if that is 72,250 students? And he said, obviously, you've done your research because that's exactly what we have here at University Tarbuka. They're all distance education students. So we could put them online easily and we wouldn't need this campus and we could put up hotels here. We could do whatever we wanted. Now that turned into the EBIT change from 52 million to $998 million, $2 million off 1 billion in the first year. But again, my beliefs and my values did not allow that to continue. What happened, and it's a very long story, but the whole business fell apart. And that's what inspired me to create Life Beyond Limits, because I realized that the big thing that sits in the way between people and success, most of us think is talent, skill, and ability, or education, or network. Sure, they help, but mindset is the number one. Your beliefs of what you think is possible is number one. Like right now, someone could be watching this right now, and someone might be saying, that's exactly what I need. That's exactly what I need. Now, the next question is, what's it worth to think like that, to be like that? What's it worth? Now, the truth is you don't know what it's worth until you know what you're not achieving. So it's what we believe is possible is really under the microscope, the little bits of DNA that move through your body, the elements that tingle underneath your skin. It's all of those bits that determine every great thing that's ever happened in the planet. Every great invention. It's like back in the days when I was in advertising, there were so many people that came to me with inventions saying, hey, do you think this will fly? Do you think that'll fly? And like I can remember one particular guy, his name is Kevin Inkster. He created a product called the Arbortech wood carver. And the way he created it was he dreamt it. He dreamt it. He dreamt that there was this disc that had these chainsaw teeth on it that you put on an angle grinder and you could just, carve wood with this thing. And I remember working with him and I said, I've got a slogan for it. And he said, what's the slogan? I said, the best thing since sliced wood. And so we went off with that. And he's a multi-millionaire now, because that one idea had the power, had the belief, had that je ne sais quoi that sits underneath everything that's great. You'll see people who really believe in their product or their service or themselves so much that other people think they're crazy. But they believe in it so much that they're willing to go just that little bit further, just that little bit longer, just that little bit harder. Just take those risks that other people won't take because they believe in it so much. So if you imagine if you had a rope that you were holding on to and someone amazing or something amazing was holding on to the other end, then all you're going to do is just follow the leads, follow the rope, follow the hunches, follow the ideas that you get until you end up at the end of that rope, where that grand dream actually exists.
Super interesting stories, Rick. Fascinating, and I love the metaphors and how you bring it home. I really liked when you said, if everyone should just stop for a minute and assess rather than just getting caught into the next action, and really the logic, really pulling back the curtain for a little bit and just kind of imagining what's possible. And I think if what do they say? The same mind that created the problem can't change the problem. We need to, and that's why coaching and mentorship or visualization, accountability, these types of things are so important. I'm really curious to know. You mentioned risks. If you could go back in time, I know we can't do it, but if you could go back in time and change one thing or be or maybe step into a different level of risk or something like this, what would you do different, so to speak?
Just quickly before we continue, if you're an entrepreneur out there or a high performer who wants more clarity and direction in life, or maybe you're going through some kind of turbulent transitional phase, I want to share with you something that I co-built. It's called the Life Blueprint System. It's an AI-powered goal-setting process that helps you create a personalized life blueprint, kind of like an architectural plan or a business plan, but for your life. And so it allows you to take and capture those big ideas, those amazing thoughts you have, and to turn it into a proven plan of action. And so if you want to stop guessing and start building your future intentionally and consciously, go to thelifeblueprint.io to learn more. Let's go back to the episode.
I would start with an attitude. I would completely change my attitude. I would say nothing and no one is going to stop me, because I think a lot of us have got that narrative running through us, thinking that the economy is going to stop us or governments are going to stop us or, someone's going to steal our idea or something's going to stop us. And so really what we're doing is the thing that we should be doing is stopping ourselves and really allowing ourselves to dream again. And really begin to think about, what if this happened, or what if I did that, or what if my life could end in this particular way? And the thing is, I think we all become, in some cases, our worst clairvoyant when we could be our best. Where we could say, okay, here's a real dream. And really go for that dream. But the thing that I've come to realize is I used to believe that we had a purpose, that drove us through life, motivated us, got us to the end of that rope and started pulling ourselves along that rope. But I've started to realize that humanity, actually, the real purpose is usually for somebody else. It's like your purpose is actually there for someone else or some other group. And, I find I've done I've done over 39,000 hours now working one-on-one with people to help them to shift their thinking and change their life. But the thing that I really find is I've done so many hours because I really enjoy it. It's a buzz. It's a buzz, I can remember back in the Rialto days when I was learning all of this and I started my practice, and there was this one guy who was in sales, and I'd had my greatest successes in sales. So, it was a real passion. And we sat down and had a coffee, and I said to him, he was complaining about how much money he wasn't making. And I said to him, can you, just for a moment, can you consider this? What if everything that you think about how the world works and how you work is wrong? What if it's wrong? And he went, what do you mean, what if it's wrong? And I said, everything that leads you to your income, what if all of that is wrong? And he said, I still don't get it. What do you mean? And I said, you're not trying on the idea. You're still living with your idea of how money works, and you're still applying that same idea in this conversation. And if you don't shift from this moment, you're going to create that same level of thinking, and you're going to create the same results, plus or minus 15%. And that's going to be it. That's going to be your story. But I said, come on, think about yourself. Think about what value is in this man. What value is in you? Think about if you were able to bring that value out, what would happen around you in your sales? What if you believe that you could even double what you're earning right now? What would you have to do in order to double? Logically, start there. It's probably the worst place to start, but start there. And then throw your imagination into the ring. This guy saw me about a week later. We met in the very same place. And I can remember he was walking past the glass, and he pointed his finger at me like accusatory, like, it's you did this. And he walked in and he said, what the bleep happened? And I said, what do you mean? He said, I am now in line to double my income based on, ever since we spoke, my results. I am placed to double my income. And he did. He more than doubled his income. And he said, how does that work? Because he wanted to know the how. And I said, sometimes knowing the how can actually not really be the answer, because you're going to try to bring it all back into logic again. Because, our greatest poison in the world is logic. It really, really is. Like you look at some people who sit all day long with numbers, some people who sit all day long with test tubes and numbers, and they're trying so damn hard to work, as you rightly said, with Einstein's quote, you can't solve a problem at the same level that created it. So you're going to get to a new level. Now, what Einstein was actually really talking about, he was talking about metaphysics. What he was actually talking about is that if you've got a problem of anger, you're at a low vibration. I mean, they've registered anger to be, somewhere around 300 hertz. So if you've got anger going on, you're around 300 hertz. So what you've got to do is you've got to raise your energy, and that raising of the energy will get you out of anger. That's where you'll solve the anger problem. When you can actually get out of anger. It's a little bit like, it's a little bit like having some sort of distance on a problem, being an observer. Like some good strategies that people have used over the years, they've said, okay, here's a problem. How would Einstein solve it? Or here's a problem. How would Jung solve it? And that's forcing them to look at their problem in a completely different way. The story I shared with you when, we were in the recession that we had to have, back in the agency days, like I worked it out on a slide rule that it was going to take me, based on my highest salary at that point, it was going to take me, and I was in my very early 30s, it was going to take me until I was 70 years old before I would pay out the debt that I'd accumulated through that business. And I sat back and one night, I was in the agency all by myself. All the staff had left. I was sitting in my office and I was thinking, there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way to fix this. And I was sleeping at the agency, working harder, working longer, doing all of that. I had to stop. So I stopped and I thought, you know what? Without this debt, we're still making money. So therefore, without this debt, we are still making money. We're still an opportunity. So I thought, this business is saleable. So I went out to all my networks and I said, okay, I'm selling half the agency. I'm looking for this type of person. Does anyone know a person that's like that would want to buy in the agency? That one idea, as ridiculous as simply as that idea is, it was very simple. That one idea completely absolved me of all of my debt. And as I said, we grew over 3,000% in that year. So it's that stop moment, just stop.
That's so great. It's such a good one. So practical. Just stop. Just stop. Because everyone, I'm like, just do it, push through, persevere, break
Yeah.
through. But yeah, in order to have, I guess, the best breakthrough, we must stop for sure.
Yeah.
Um, Rik, there's so many great questions here. I want to be respectful of your time. I've got a couple of key questions to ask you. How can people get in touch? I'll put all your links around here. And we also promised them, the two big questions that everyone should be asking. So we'll ask that next, as well as some other cool questions I have for you. But yeah, from who's listening, who should reach out?
Okay. If people feel or get a sense that they're not at the level that they know that they can get to, I like working with those people. And the reason is, you know, I do not like working with people who have a story that they just want to keep telling themselves and keep themselves stuck in a horrible loop. I've worked with many people like that, but that's not a lot of fun for anybody, unless that person is willing to change almost everything. So the thing that I would say, if you're at a point where there's something more in you, but you've hit a glass ceiling, that glass ceiling doesn't exist, but you do believe it's there, and so there it is. So for those people who are willing to just see what life can be actually like, what business can be like, what life can be like when that glass ceiling disappears, that is exciting, because that is a point of breakthrough. When you literally break through the glass ceiling that isn't there, but you thought it was.
Amazing. I'll put all your links around here. Everybody, if you're resonating, if you get that sense, if you get that feel, reach out to Rik. Today's the day for a breakthrough. Get in touch with him. So, Rik, you mentioned there's these two big questions people should be asking to really elevate their spiritual meaning, or their own journey right now. What are those two questions? It wasn't the questions that the lady asked you, was it?
No,
No, they're
it
different.
wasn't. The two questions that I believe are really, really important is, the first question is, why was I born? Now that particular question, what that actually does is that can bring you into a purposeful space, or it can bring you into a spiritual space, or it can bring you to a motive where you get a sense of why you were born. Now, for me, I asked that question of myself when I was 4 years old. And the question that I got was, I'm here for humanity. I'm here for people. Back then it was people. Today I know it as humanity. I'm here to help people to break out of their limits, out of their conditions, and I know that. So the next question that is really helpful, and this is the self-esteem piece. In truth, there are many questions, but this would be another question that I would ask. What is the greatest value in me? What is the greatest value in me? See whether you can summarize it down to one particular thing, that you can simplify somehow. So if I was to ask that question of myself, my value is certainly care. I care a lot about humanity. I care a lot for my clients, my students, people who want to extract the best value that I have out of me. So care is really big. But the value that is really in me is my ability to see through people's BS, see through their own narratives that they're really kidding themselves. And I mean in a negative way. I don't mean in a good way. I mean in a negative way, where they're telling themselves stories that are not really them. Just like my story, I'm the poor kid. Why? Because I was raised from a poor family. It's nonsense. It really is, because I'm not that person anymore. And that comes back to your earlier question, picture. I had a different picture in my mind.
Why was I born, and what is the greatest value in me?
Yeah. And if you want to add, that I can give to others.
Greatest value I could give in me that I can give to others. Beautiful.
Yeah. And if you think about that, when you answer that, your value goes up.
Yeah, I'm a big believer. There's times where I've been kept inside. The metaphor would be, sometimes I was trying to figure out my value by being inside the glass bottle, trying to read the label, but being inside the bottle.
Yes.
And so, but when I was able to step outside of the bottle and see my value or the label, and then realize I get to choose the label, I get to
Yeah,
choose how
you
I
do.
perceive my value, then as I changed that internally, that externally changed, whether it was a change in relationship with my intimate relationships or a new decision around choosing to eat more clean food and sleep on time and things like this, or whether it was in sales and being able to articulate or communicate the value. I don't know. It was like as I shifted that story of my own value externally, that was reflected. The mirror
Mm,
worked that way. But
yeah.
what I'm really curious to know about, Rick, is like, how do I know which value to focus on, which story to focus on that's going to give me the best value? Obviously, I got to book in a session with you, but it's like, how do I know if I have a limiting belief around I mother trauma or father trauma or things that happened with my first girlfriend or when I was at school and I didn't believe that I was good enough. Like, how do we find, because there's probably all of them have an impact on us subconsciously, but how do I know the one that's going to be the most important for that breakthrough? Is that
Mm.
possible? Is that something your work uncovers?
Yes,
Or
the
it's like an
thing.
onion?
Well, the thing to think about, there's a process that I use called the three brain integration. So it's like you're interviewing. You start off interviewing your heart, and I know that might sound a bit hackney, but it's not. The heart is actually a brain. It's got about 42,000 neurons, and you interview your heart and you ask, what does my heart truly, truly, truly want? What does my heart truly want? Now, the hardest questions for people to ask is, what do I want and how do I get it? They're the hardest questions for people to answer. And the reason is because people don't stop. People just find themselves on an endless loop, primary school, secondary school, college, university, work, and, they're just on the treadmill the entire time. They don't actually pause to reflect and ask those very, very important questions. What is really, really important to me? So once you know the answer to that, it's going to be an internal value that you have that other people are probably going to want. But don't focus on the outside, focus on the inside first and focus on the heart. The head brain is only going to give you logic. The head brain is only going to give you what you've done. It's not going to give you anything you haven't yet done or haven't yet read in a book or seen in a movie. So the heart is really your value piece. That's where all your values are stored, in your heart. So your heart basically says, like when I decide I was going to write my book, which that's it there, by the way, a richer way to think. When I wrote this book, like this book is huge now. It keeps getting bigger every time we republish. But basically, my heart was, I want to write that book. But that was just the vehicle. The reason I wanted to write that book is because so many people are living an illusion, but it's a very convincing one, as Einstein said, and they're stuck in this illusion that they think this is the way the world is, this is the way the world works, this is who I am. And what happens is those illusions come at the identity level, the I ams, I am only. And when they get locked in at that level, that's how they keep moving on that treadmill. So the first thing is to get off, stop, reflect. One of the best things that you could do is invest an entire day to do nothing other than think, what do I want? And answer that question. Start with a notepad, write lots of things. I want this, I want that, I want this. When I'm working with clients, I say, I want at least a list of 100 things that you want. And they go, seriously, 100? And I said, look, the first 50, you're just going to give me what you think I expect to come out of you. But after that 50, you'll start breaking through your boundary conditions and finding other things that you truly, truly want. Maybe things you've buried, for years. And when you can go through that list, you can go, oh my God, that's it. That's what I want. I want that. And then when you find that, you'll find an energy that lives around it as well. And you'll just keep going, for that energy. And the thing that, like, I really feel in my life, what I'm here to do is to wake people up, to become more conscious. And consciousness is not just having your eyes open. Consciousness is knowing who you are, knowing who you serve, knowing what world you live in, but where you came from.
We could just wrap it up there. It's profound words of wisdom, Rick. No, it's really, really interesting.
Thank you.
I'm curious, and my last question before I ask that is, you mentioned, who do you serve?
Yeah.
Who is that? And for you personally, it sounds like there is a deep level of spiritual connection that you have with the creator. What does that mean to you? And yeah, how do you, I guess, bring that into your everyday life? Because it's easy to say these things, it's like,
Yeah.
I'm serving this, or I'm doing this is my vision and this, and we kind of get, well, I've been caught in just the head part of that. But from a heart level, who is the creator for you?
For me, I don't like to define the creator as God, Muhammad, Allah, Buddha, any particular brand. And the reason is because I often get up and do talks on stage. I do trainings, I do coaching. I work with a lot of people. I don't want to be the guy that says that's the only deity that you can believe in. Because what we do with those things is we create certainty. And then we get countries that fight other countries that have different certainties. So the most important thing is to have your own spiritual concept and don't project that on other people. Just believe it within you. So I'll call it the universe. Really, I'm a bit eclectic. I like a lot of various religions, but I equally know there's some lies in amongst some of those truths, and that's like walking through a bit of a minefield. You can believe in something, but that something might not really serve you or the collective whole, So the thing that I think is really, really important is waking people up so they can find the answers to those big questions that they really need to find. And when they do, that is breakthrough moment. That is when people are unstoppable, when people are passionate, when people have motive. I've always said, and I say this to my students a lot, reasons get results. If you have a really, really, really good reason, you'll get really good results. But if you're just doing it for the money, or you're just doing it to keep a roof over your head, that's not a really good reason. That's a survival strategy.
I'm really curious, and you've opened up another doorway here for a second. It's, I'm curious to know, because it sounds like you have this deep relationship with the universe, right?
Yeah.
You have this deep relationship with what you would call, as you said. When did you realize that? Was that something you naturally had as your nature, or was it nurtured, as conditioned in a certain way? Was there, do you have an aha breakthrough moment regarding that deep relationship that you have with the
Yeah,
universe
I
now?
I had I won't give the person a name, but I saw someone on my next door neighbor's roof, would you believe, when I was 4 years old. And that someone looked at me, and I know that I've worked with that someone before in another lifetime. And it was kind of like just that look that I was given at that age made me, it was just like, it wasn't like I was told a sentence or given something. It was like that one moment just gave me everything that I needed to know. And I knew that we had to be kind on this planet. I knew we had to be caring, sharing. I knew that there were many, many people that were conditioned to the perspective of being victimized or being incarcerated or held back. And there's a lot of people like that on the planet today. But there's equally a lot of other people who are really starting to wake up, which I think is fantastic, but it was really that moment that made me just know. But as I got older and as I got intelligence, it blocked that. It said, no, that wasn't even real. That didn't happen. That couldn't have happened, and so I began to doubt. And it was all of that doubt created pain, and I did the traditional, fall down flat. I just broke down in so many different ways. But it was through that I began to understand pain, and understand how you actually get there. And then once I started learning how to untrain my brain, that's when I found freedom. That's when I found levels of joy. And so I think a spiritual purpose is great, and I don't want to say that God isn't real or Muhammad isn't real or Allah isn't real or anything like that. I wouldn't want to say that because for a lot of people, be they real or be they not, it's that rope that they're holding on to that is important for them. It really, really is. And it's important that they have this level of faith because faith is the stepping stone when there is no stepping stone, and it helps us to kind of make that decision to take that risky next step.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's sounds like that was a profound breakthrough moment for you.
It was.
And the more that I interview these amazing people, that there is this deep sense of a deep relationship with the universe, God, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful to see. And I think the world, as you mentioned, can kind of cloud that connection and get us into our logic. And the logical mind can, I guess, yeah, blur this deep sense of spiritual connection that we have. And so thank you for sharing that. And I think it's such a great reminder. And it's such a common theme. And it just comes up naturally in these conversations where there is a deep belief around faith to take that step, yeah, be willing to let go and be supported in whatever that is for the person. And that's what's a big part of these breakthroughs is having that faith to step forward or burn the boats, so to
Yeah.
speak.
It's just like what you're doing here in this podcast. It's you've created a moment of opportunity, a moment of magic. And this would not have happened if it wasn't for you holding that faith or holding that idea. So, never underestimate the value of that. It can be immense. You never quite know exactly where that could take you.
Thank you. Yeah, these moments are something that life just happens. We move on so quick, and it's important to reflect on these moments. I think these moments and these stories are so
Yeah.
fundamental, and it's. I learned so much about not just your story, but also reflecting on my own stories. I'm like, oh wow, like yeah, and it's important to appreciate these little moments and talk about them and share them and help each other out. So my final question, Rick, is around helping other people have a breakthrough. Speaking of breakthroughs,
Yeah.
what would you suggest or challenge for people to do today to help them break through?
Okay. Here's a nice little piece that I think people will get. It'll cause them to pause, but if they get it, it could create an incredible breakthrough. So the question is the question. What is a question that if you were to ask yourself this one question and dedicate your life to answer this question, that as a result of answering the question would give you the greatest life you could ever imagine? So the question is, what is that question?
What is the question I could ask that's going to allow me to live the best life? What was the wording? The
The
best life
best
possible?
life imaginable.
Imaginable. It's so great because everyone can ask that and then just do that. That's the best breakthrough, right? That's
Absolutely.
genius.
Yeah,
That's a great one.
it's kind of like when you start a business, for example. Typically what a lot of people are asking them is what's next, but they haven't really asked themselves the first and best question yet. They just go, what's next? Oh, I need to register the business. What's next? Should it be a company? Should it be a sole operator? What's next? Who's going to be our accountant? They're just fundamental pragmatic questions that are just going to take you to a point you're just going to create an average sort of business that everyone creates. But what if you asked yourself a better question? Like, how could I totally transform the consciousness of this planet? It's a
Yeah,
big question, but all of a sudden you've got to start scratching your head and start thinking, oh, gee, how could I do that?
that's
You know,
awesome.
ask
Yeah,
yourself a better question if you want a better life.
yeah, yeah. And what do they say? A problem. If you have a problem, a question. Oh my gosh, I'm going to stuff this up, but it's about the quality of the question. The answer is in the question, right? And
Yeah.
so if we can ask better questions, we can have better results and a better life. So
Yeah.
no,
Or
that's
I think
brilliant.
Tony Robbins says it in this way. He says, the quality of your questions determine the quality of your life.
Well said. Well
You
said.
know,
I know that you mentioned something prior to the podcast. You mentioned for anyone else out there if they want to get in touch, you're going to offer a 30-minute call with them. Can you, I'll put the link around here. What is what can they expect from that call, and who should really want to book in for that?
Okay, that call is for anybody who is kind of, as I was mentioning earlier, just here and wants to kind of break through. They can ask me any questions that they believe is going to help them to break through. So what I'll also do is I'll ask them a lot of questions. Why do you think this? Why do you think that? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And so I'll help them to get clear. So the link for that is lifebeyondlimits.com.au/help. So it's called a solution session. So if they book in there, they'll get access to my diary, and I will give them everything that they need in that time that we have. So I'll do as much as I can to help and get clear. For some people, they're going to want to get clear. Some people are going to want to get solutions. Some people are going to need to ask some bigger questions to get some answers, but I'll be there for any of that. So we'll treat it as a coaching session.
Very powerful. Everybody at home, seriously, this has been a monumental conversation, Rik. I really appreciate the insight
Thank you.
and just the stories and everything there. It's given everybody, or I can see people out there, guys, girls, ladies, gentlemen. If you're wanting a breakthrough, get in touch with Rik. I'll put his links around here. Book in that session. You've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. And everybody at home, who do you know who would benefit from today's conversation? Please send it to them. This is how we grow the podcast. And please, what was your aha moment? Put it into the comments. We'd love to hear your breakthrough moment as well. Rik, we're gonna wrap up. I appreciate your time. Do you have any final comments or anything we've missed?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been watching this from the beginning right up to now. I think just that alone shows that you've got dedication, shows that you really want to learn and you really want to get to where you ideally imagine yourself to get to. So, you've got everything you need, which is awesome. So I want to thank you for spending the time with Zach and I, and thank you, Zach. This has been equally a privilege. You've asked some brilliant questions, which is always key in these programs. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been a great conversation. I've got a page of
welcome.
notes. And for sure, this is a moment where everyone could choose to have a breakthrough. It happens today, everybody. Don't wait for tomorrow. Stop and make it happen today. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time on the Breakthrough Moment podcast. Appreciate it, Rik.
Thank you.